There is a room inside you where nothing has ever been solved. You go there every night. You've been going there your whole life. And the question you've never asked is this: what if the room itself is the problem? You wake, and within seconds, the machinery begins. Thoughts arrive like uninvited guests, each one demanding attention, each one insisting it matters. What you said yesterday, what you should have said, what tomorrow might bring, what could go wrong, what already has. This is the life most of us know. A life narrated by an inner voice that never rests, never pauses, never allows the space between one thought and the next to simply exist. We call this consciousness. We call it identity. We call it me. But there's something strange happening beneath all of this noise. Something you may have felt, but never fully noticed. The thinking doesn't actually stop anything. It doesn't resolve the anxiety. It doesn't answer the questions. It creates new ones. It takes a single moment of uncertainty and builds an entire architecture of worry around it. It takes a small hurt and replays it until it becomes a defining story. And you, the real you, the awareness watching all of this unfold you, become convinced that you are the thoughts, that you are the endless commentary, the planning, the remembering, the anticipating. But here's the truth that changes everything. You are not your thoughts. You never were. Imagine you're sitting by a river. The water flows past, sometimes clear, sometimes muddy, sometimes calm, sometimes turbulent. You don't control the river. You don't decide what flows past. You simply watch. Your thoughts are that river. They arise from conditions you didn't choose, your past experiences, your biology, the culture you were raised in, the conversation you had this morning, the quality of your sleep last night. They emerge, they pass through the space of your awareness, and they disappear, yet somewhere along the way, you began to believe you were creating them, that you were the author, that the voice in your head was you speaking to yourself. This is the first illusion, the thinker. There is thinking, yes, but where is the thinker? Where is this separate entity generating thoughts? If you look closely, really look, you'll find something astonishing. There's no one there. There's just the process itself. Thoughts thinking themselves. A stream of mental activity with no central author. The moment you see this, even for an instant, something loosens. The grip relaxes. Because if you're not the thinker, then you don't have to believe every thought. You don't have to obey every worry. You don't have to solve every problem the mind creates. You can simply let the river flow. What we're really searching for. But why do we think so much? Why does the mind create this endless parade of words and images and scenarios? It's searching. Always searching. The mind believes deeply, instinctively, that the next thought will bring the answer. That if it just thinks hard enough, long enough, clearly enough, it will finally arrive at the solution. It will finally feel safe. It will finally understand. It will finally be enough. This is the engine that drives overthinking, anxiety, existential dread. Not stupidity, but intelligence turned against itself. The mind doing what it was designed to do, solve problems, but applying that function to problems that cannot be solved by thinking. You cannot think your way into inner peace. You cannot analyze your way into presence. You cannot plan your way into a life that feels deeply, genuinely alive. These things exist in a different dimension. They live in the space that appears when thinking ends. The moment between thoughts, Have you ever noticed the gap? It happens sometimes, usually by accident. You're looking at a sunset, and for just a moment, the commentary stops. Or you're listening to music, and suddenly you're not thinking about the music, you are the listening itself. Or you're playing with a child, or lost in something you love, and time seems to dissolve. In those moments, something extraordinary happens. The world doesn't disappear. You don't disappear. In fact, everything becomes more vivid, more immediate, more real. But the story stops. The narrative pauses. The endless loop of past and future, judgment and comparison, fear and desire, it all goes quiet. And in that quietness, you discover something you'd forgotten, something that's been there all along beneath the noise. A simple, profound awareness, a presence, a beingness that doesn't need to think to know it exists. This is what remains when thought ends, not nothing. Not emptiness in the sense of absence, but a fullness so complete, so utterly here, that it has no need to narrate itself. The return to now, most spiritual teachings point to this: meditation, mindfulness, prayer, contemplation. They're all different doorways into the same room, the space, beyond compulsive thinking. And the beautiful irony is that this space isn't somewhere else. It's not a destination you reach after years of practice. It's here, right now. Beneath this very sentence you're hearing, beneath the thought that's already forming in response to these words, you don't have to wait for the mind to be perfectly still. You don't have to achieve some exalted state. You simply have to notice what's already present when you stop looking exclusively through the lens of thought. The breath moving in your body, the sensation of being alive, the awareness that knows it's aware. This is your natural state. This is what you are when you're not trying to be anything, and it's always been here, patiently waiting, never leaving, never absent. The question is not, how do I get there? The question is, can I notice that I've never left? Before you can rest in what remains, you must face the part of you that fears the silence more than anything. The part that would rather suffer in familiar noise than risk dissolving into peace. The voice that claims to be you. Let's be honest about something. When you first hear that you're not your thoughts, a part of you resists strongly. That resistance has a voice. It says, but if I'm not my thoughts, then who am I? If I stop thinking, won't I just disappear? Won't I become passive, lost, without direction? Isn't thinking what makes me human? What makes me successful? What keeps me safe? This voice is persuasive. It sounds reasonable. It sounds like wisdom. But this is the ego's last defense. The final strategy of the false self trying to maintain its territory. The ego isn't some demon to be destroyed. It's simply a pattern, a habit of identification, a way of organizing experience around a central reference point called me. And one of its primary tools is thought, constant, repetitive, self-referential thought that reinforces the feeling of being a separate self in a threatening world. When you begin to question thought itself, the ego feels its foundation shaking. So it does what any survival mechanism does: it fights back. It creates new thoughts that sound spiritual, but actually keep you trapped in the same pattern. I need to think less. I should be more present. Why can't I stop my mind? Notice something: these are still thoughts. Thoughts about thoughts. The mind creating a new problem to solve, a new project to work on, a new reason to stay busy. This is the trap. You cannot think your way out of thinking. The addiction to meaning, making. Here's what makes it harder. We're addicted to meaning. The mind is a meaning-making machine. It takes raw experience, sensations, sounds, sights, feelings, and immediately wraps them in interpretation. It creates stories. It assigns significance. It builds elaborate narratives about what everything means and how it relates to me. This isn't wrong. It's one of humanity's great gifts. Our ability to create meaning has given us art, science, culture connection. But we've become so good at it that we can't stop. We compulsively interpret even experiences that don't need interpretation. We narrate moments that would be more fully lived in silence. A sunset becomes a photo opportunity and a caption. A conversation becomes material for analysis. A feeling becomes a problem to solve or a story to tell. And in that process, we miss the actual experience. We trade the living moment for a mental representation of it. The addiction to meaning. Making is the addiction to the thinking mind. And like any addiction, it promises satisfaction, but delivers only the craving for more. What the mind fears most. So why is it so hard to let go? Why does the prospect of thoughtless awareness feel threatening instead of liberating? Because the mind equates silence with death. In the mind's logic, thinking equals existence. I think, therefore I am. If the thinking stops, what's left? This fear runs deep. Deeper than psychology. It touches something primal, the organism's drive to survive. Now entangled with the sense that the narrative self is the organism. But here's what the mind doesn't know, can't know. Because it lives entirely in the realm of thought. You existed before you learned to think in words. You exist in the space between thoughts. You exist in deep sleep when there's no narrative at all. The awareness that animates this body, that reads these words, that feels what you feel, that awareness doesn't depend on thought. It's prior to thought. More fundamental, more intimate. Thought is something that happens to awareness, not something awareness needs to continue being. When you see this, really see it, not just understand it intellectually, the fear begins to dissolve. Because you realize that letting go of compulsive thinking isn't annihilation. It's coming home. The difference between thinking and awareness, let's make a crucial distinction. There's nothing wrong with thinking. Thinking is a tool, a magnificent tool. You need thinking to navigate life, to plan, to create, to communicate, to learn. This very script required thought to write. The words you're hearing now are the product of thinking. The problem isn't thinking itself. The problem is identification with thinking. The problem is compulsive thinking. The problem is being lost in thought, believing you are the thought, being unable to stop even when the thinking serves no purpose and causes suffering. Awareness, on the other hand, is what allows you to know you're thinking. It's the space in which thoughts appear. It's what remains when thinking ends. You can be aware of thoughts without being lost in them. You can use thinking when it's useful and let it rest when it's not. You can distinguish between the tool and the one using the tool. This is freedom, not the absence of thought, but the ability to relate to thought from awareness rather than from unconscious identification. The practice of noticing. So how do you begin? How do you step back from the tyranny of endless thinking? Not by trying to stop thoughts. That's just another thought trying to control thinking. and it creates tension, frustration, a new problem to solve. Instead, you simply notice. You become interested in the space between thoughts, the silence beneath the noise, the awareness that's already here. Right now, as you hear these words, there's a knowing. Something in you knows that you're listening. Something is aware of the thoughts arising in response to these ideas. What is that something? Can you feel it? Not as a concept, but as a living presence. It has no shape, no location, no beginning or end. It doesn't come and go. It's simply here, quiet, vast, untroubled by what appears within it. This is what you are. This is what remains when thought ends. And the moment you recognize it, even for a flicker, everything changes. Because you realize you were never the voice in your head. You were always the listening itself. What if you've been trying to live your life? When life has been trying to live you? What if the exhaustion comes not from living, but from interfering with the living that's already happening? The effort of control. Think about your breath right now. For the past few moments, it's been happening on its own, rising and falling, perfectly calibrated to your body's needs. No thought required. But the moment you try to control it, something changes. It becomes effortful, awkward. You have to think about when to inhale, how deeply when to exhale. And it never quite feels natural. This is what happens when we try to control life with thought. Life is already flowing. Your heart beats without consultation. Your body heals its wounds without instructions. Hunger arrives when you need food. Sleep comes when you need rest. Creativity emerges when conditions align. Love appears without being commanded. This is the Tao, the natural way. The intelligence that moves through all things, orchestrating complexity without effort, without struggle, without the need for a central controller issuing orders. But the thinking mind doesn't trust this. It believes it must be in charge. It believes that without constant vigilance, constant planning, constant controlling, everything will fall apart. So it interferes. It second-guesses instinct. It overrides intuition. It replaces spontaneity with calculation. And in doing so, it creates the very struggle it fears. The wisdom beneath words, you've experienced this wisdom. You've felt it in moments when you forgot yourself. The athlete in flow doesn't think about each movement. The body knows. The moment they start thinking, should I do this technique? They falter. The musician lost in the music isn't consciously choosing each note. Something deeper plays through them. The right words come when you stop searching for them. The solution appears when you stop trying to force it. The next step reveals itself when you trust the walking. This isn't mysticism. This is direct experience, ordinary magic. But we've been taught to distrust it. We've been taught that intelligence lives exclusively in the thinking mind, in the realm of words and concepts and plans. We've forgotten the intelligence that grew your body in your mother's womb, the intelligence that dreams your dreams, the intelligence that knows how to fall in love, how to grieve, how to laugh, how to heal. This intelligence doesn't speak in words. It speaks in sensations, in impulses, in a knowing that has no language. And it operates perfectly when thought doesn't interfere. The controller is the controlled. Here is the deepest irony, the you. That's trying to control your life is itself part of the flow. A wave trying to control the ocean. A thought trying to think its way to freedom. The sense of being a separate self, a controller living somewhere behind your eyes making decisions, this too is just a thought. A particularly sticky, convincing thought, but still just mental activity arising in awareness. When you see this, really see it, there's a relief so profound it can bring tears. Because you realize you were never actually responsible for holding everything together. The universe wasn't waiting for you to figure it all out. You're an expression of life, not separate from it. You're something the universe is doing, just like a wave is something the ocean is doing. The wave doesn't need to learn how to be a wave. It doesn't need to perfect its wave technique. It simply is what it is, moved by forces larger than itself. This doesn't mean you become passive. It doesn't mean you stop acting, stop choosing, stop engaging with life. It means you stop pretending that the small, thinking self is in control, and you allow the deeper intelligence to move through you. This is when life becomes effortless. Not easy, but effortless. Like the bird flying, like the river finding its way to the sea. When you stop resisting what is, most of our thinking is resistance. Resistance to what's happening. Resistance to what we're feeling. Resistance to the way things are. This shouldn't be happening. I shouldn't feel this way. It should be different. I should be different. Every. Should is the mind arguing with reality, and reality always wins. But here's what happens when thought ends, even temporarily. Resistance ends. Not because you've achieved some perfect acceptance, but because without the thought, this shouldn't be. There's just this. Whatever is actually here. Whatever is actually happening. And what you discover when you stop resisting is that what's actually here is almost always workable. Almost always bearable. The pain you feel becomes just sensation, rising and falling. The fear you experience becomes just energy moving through. The sadness, the anger, the confusion, they're just weather patterns passing through the sky of your awareness. It's the thinking about the experience that makes it unbearable. The story about what it means. The projection into the future. The comparison to how things should be. When thought ends, suffering doesn't necessarily end. But the extra suffering, the suffering we add through resistance and narrative that dissolves. And often, that extra layer is 90% of what we call suffering. The art of allowing, so the practice becomes allowing. Not forcing, not controlling, not resisting. Allowing thoughts to come and go without grabbing onto them. Allowing feelings to move through without needing to fix them. Allowing life to unfold without needing it to match your plan. This doesn't mean you don't act. It means your action comes from a different place. Not from fear and control, but from response. From the natural intelligence that knows what's needed without having to think about it first. You still make choices, but they arise from clarity rather than confusion, from presence rather than anxiety, from the whole of you rather than just the thinking mind. And here's what's strange. When you stop trying so hard to make life work, it often works better. Doors open that you didn't know existed. Solutions appear that your thinking mind never could have conceived. Synchronicities multiply. Grace enters, not because you've earned it or figured it out, but because you've stopped blocking it with the noise of constant thinking. What's living you? So ask yourself in this moment, right now, what needs to be thought about? What genuine problem needs solving through thinking? And if the answer is nothing, if you're just thinking out of habit, out of the addiction to mental activity, then what happens if you let the thinking rest? What remains? Not emptiness, fullness, life itself, the presence that's been here all along, the awareness that needs no improvement, the being that you are before you try to be anything. This is what's living you. This is what remains when thought ends. And it's enough. It's always been enough. You've spent your whole life learning. What if it's time to unlearn? What if the deepest wisdom isn't something you acquire, but something you remember? The forgetting and the remembering. There was a time when you knew this. Before language, before the self-concept formed, before you learned to be you. You existed as pure presence, pure awareness. Everything was immediate, vivid, direct. No separation between the experiencer and the experienced. No distance between you and life. Then you learned words. You learned your name. You learned me and mine. You learned past and future. You learned fear and desire. You learned to narrate your experience rather than simply live it. This learning was necessary. This is how you became a functioning human being, able to navigate the complexities of human life. But something was lost. Or rather, something was forgotten. Buried beneath layers of conditioning, beneath the constant stream of thought, beneath the constructed identity. And now perhaps you're ready to remember, not by going backwards, not by trying to become childlike or primitive, but by recognizing what's been here all along, beneath and within the layers of thought and identity. The permission you don't need. Here's something important. You don't need permission to stop thinking. You don't need to achieve some special state or reach some level of spiritual advancement. You can let thought rest right now, in this moment, for just a few seconds. What stops you isn't inability. It's the belief that you shouldn't, the fear that something bad will happen, the habit of always doing, always processing, always being busy inside. But nothing bad happens when thinking stops. The world doesn't end. You don't disappear. In fact, the opposite happens. You appear, fully. For perhaps the first time in years, this is the great permission. You can be here without the commentary. You can experience life directly, without filtering it through the thinking mind. You can exist without justifying your existence through productivity or achievement or being someone special. You can simply be. And in that being, you discover something ancient and new. Something that's been waiting patiently for you to stop long enough to notice it. What fear cannot touch, let's name what might be arising. Fear, resistance. The mind saying, "Yais, but what about?" Or "This is all very nice, but I have real problems." This is natural. This is the last gasp of the pattern trying to maintain itself. But notice, you can be aware of the fear. You can watch the resistance arise. Which means you're not the fear. You're not the resistance. You're the awareness in which they appear. Fear is a feeling in the body. Resistance is a thought. Both are objects of awareness. They come and go. They have a beginning and an end. But awareness itself, what you truly are, is never touched by them. A cloud doesn't damage the sky. A wave doesn't disturb the ocean's depths. And no thought, no feeling, no experience can disturb the awareness that you are. This isn't something you need to believe. You can verify it right now. Notice that you're noticing. Observe that you're observing. Be aware of awareness itself. This is what remains when thought ends. This is what you are when you stop trying to be anything, and it's indestructible. It has no problems. It needs no improvement. It simply is. The practice that isn't practice. So what do you do with all of this? How do you integrate it into your daily life? The truth is, there's nothing to do. This isn't about adding another practice to your routine. It's about recognizing what's already here when you stop doing. But if you want to practice, here it is: notice. Just notice. Notice when you're lost in thought. Not to judge it or fix it, but just to see it clearly. In that noticing, a gap appears. A moment of freedom. Notice the space between thoughts, the silence beneath sound, the stillness beneath movement. Notice what's aware of all this, what sees the thoughts, hears the sounds, feels the feelings. And whenever you remember, in the middle of the day, in the middle of a conversation, in the middle of worry, ask, what's here when thought ends? Don't answer with another thought. Just look. Just feel. Just be. That's all. That's everything. The life that unfolds, and here's what happens, gradually, naturally, without forcing. Life becomes simpler. Not easier, necessarily, but simpler. Clear, direct. You stop solving problems that don't exist. You stop creating suffering where there is none. You stop fighting battles in your mind. Challenges still come. Difficulties arise. But you meet them from presence rather than panic. From clarity rather than confusion. From the whole of your being rather than just the thinking mind. And you discover that you're enough. Not because you've achieved something or proven something, but because the awareness you are has always been enough. Complete. Whole. Lacking nothing. The ending, that's a beginning, so here we are, at the end of words, at the edge of what can be said. Everything we've explored points to something that can't be fully captured in language. Something that must be discovered directly. In the living silence of your own awareness, the words can point. The concepts can guide. But at some point, you have to look for yourself. You have to stop reading about water and drink. And the beautiful thing is, you can do that right now. You can let these words fade into the silence from which they came. You can rest in what remains when thought ends, not as an escape from life, but as a deeper entry into it. Not as a rejection of thinking, but as a freedom from its tyranny. This is the return, the homecoming, the recognition of what you've always been beneath the noise of constant thinking. You are the silence that allows sound, the stillness that allows movement, the awareness that allows all experience. And you don't have to do anything to be this. You already are. So rest here, even for a moment. Let the thinking mind settle. Let the questions dissolve. What remains when thought ends? Not nothing, everything. This